Hello again. Welcome to Chapter 2, The Middle Ages. Middle Ages is a pretty complex and long musical period. Depending on who you talk to, they break it into 3 or sometimes 4 subgroups. It gets into very esoteric discussions that aren't worth the trouble here in a general music appreciation class. If you get fascinated with it, of course, there's a ton more material out there than what's in the workbook we're using. We basically say it starts in the early Middle Ages. Music, depending on who you talk to, 6 to 800 Common Period AD, and goes up to 1450. And again, that's because we like that 1450 stop date because that makes the rest of the 150-year periods that are coming work really well. The truth is, again, probably more around 1420, 1430, but the test is going to say 1450, so 1450 it is. Middle Ages is all about the church. The Middle Ages is mostly about vocal music, although instrumental music does begin to play a bit of a role as we go through the period. We start with an introduction. A lot of the chapters will have this link to Classic FM. I recommend these highly. Classic FM is a fantastic website and very detailed and just full of stuff. Each period is represented. Many composers are represented. You'll see this link throughout the ebook, or of course it's in the print book too. You just have to type it in yourself. It's a really useful tool for digging deeper and hearing a lot of music, seeing a lot of great videos as well. Again, historical documents throughout the book. This one is Boethius. We were fascinated by the music of the Greeks. Boethius, of course, was Roman, and he writes about the Greeks later on. But this has become a very important early music treatise. Of course, we've got it translated into English for you. You don't have to read it in Latin because that would just be mean. But it gives you a little history and how the music worked for the Greeks and how it became early notation and leads us to music in the early Christian church. Throughout the book, you're going to hit focus on forms, and here's the first one, very, very important, the development of the Mass. The Mass eventually develops into 2 sections, the propers and the ordinary. We're going to spend most of our time focusing on the unchanging text, the 5 movements of the Mass ordinary. They're right here in this chart. Memorize them in order, Kyrie, Gloria, Credo, Sanctus, Agnus Dei. Now you also see the Itemus Est at the bottom. That's just the dismissal. That's the benediction. That's the hey, drive safely going home. Go Steelers, because it's Sunday and we go to football after church. I'm just saying. These are a little more complicated. They go through a long evolutionary process. We do use music in some of these sections, and we'll discuss that specifically when we get to it. It's not near as important, though. What you need to know, 2 sections of the Mass, the proper and the ordinary. The text for the proper changes every week. The ordinary is always exactly the same, and it's these 5, again in order, K, G, C, S, A, D, Kyrie, Gloria, Credo, Sanctus, Agnus Dei. Then we start talking about monophonic music, the Gregorian chant, and how it evolves, different textures. We get to our first listening guide. Now, in the HTML book, here's the listening guide. It works with a time code, and the playlist is embedded in the HTML. When you press play, it makes music. It plays the track. Now, if for some reason you want to stream these differently, or if you're working with a print book and you don't want to bother coming into this HTML book, you can also, pardon me, let me get out of this chapter, you can also scroll back up to the top of the chapter and you can go over here to the tab that says Streaming Media. When you click on that tab, here's all the streaming media for the entire workbook. And again, it works the same way. It's just a little player, press it, and it plays. It makes music for you, and you can scroll through it. You can hear different parts of it. You can stop it and start another one, whatever you need to do. So if you're using the hard copy of the book, if you prefer to do that, you absolutely can access the streaming that way too. Back to the HTML book for now, back in the Middle Ages. Now, you can also navigate the HTML through this little side thing here, which is really nice. So we were just on Gregorian chant. Hildegard is next. She's one of the first named people that we talk about in the Middle Ages. You again have a track from her with a detailed listening guide. We take you through the Notre Dame School, Philip de Vitry. We start talking about polyphonic music. Again, there are active links where it's appropriate. Detailed listening guides throughout. Much smaller section in this chapter is secular music because we know a lot less about it. most of the stuff that was written down in this history is about sacred music. And in fact, some of the secular music that was preserved was actually preserved by monks. They would do these beautiful illuminations like you see here, and they were writing on animal skin, vellum. And it was very valuable. It was a very complicated process. And so if they had space lifts, sometimes in the margins, they'd write little secular tunes, little pop tunes that they liked of the day. And the only reason we have it preserved is because they're secular stuff preserved in what are considered to be sacred texts. The smallest section of all is this little trotta at the end of the section, which I think is just really, really cool. This trotto is a very rare piece. It's one of the few instrumental pieces that was written down. And again, it was written down in a sacred codex. That's the only reason we have it preserved. You can also hear instrumental music used by the troubadours, the trouvères. C'est fait homme, my French is terrible, is our example here. You're going to talk a lot about authentic performance practice and how performances work. This is a good example of a modern group doing what they consider authentic performance practice. It's strophic. Each verse they do with different instruments. They do with different voices. What it's doing is giving you a look at a lot of different ways it could have been performed. A lot of this music really up through the Baroque. Some of our performance practices are kind of best guess. We're not sure. Of course, there's no recordings until the early 19th century, so into the early 20th century, the early 1900s. Way to go, Dr. Scheer. So it's a best guess. We don't really know. So I like this recording in particular because it gives you a lot of different versions. Now, you can look up this same piece. You can plug that into Spotify or YouTube or Napster, and it'll come up with 20 different recordings of the same piece, and each person will perform it a different way, which is kind of cool. So, Middle Ages, a lot of sacred music, learn about the Mass. Also the beginnings of secular music, though it's less important here than it will be later on. Happy Middle Ages!